My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Welcome back to Miss Cleo's Storytelling Corner. My name is Cleo Duke Wright, and I own Cull Books at 677 Blue Hills Avenue in Hartford, Connecticut. You have an open invitation to join me anytime in the bookstore. Sit down, have a cup of coffee, tea, talk books. I love that. So anytime you have the time, come and visit me at Cull Books. This week's, I want to finish up that story that I started last week. And if you were not with us, it was The Peasant and the Princess. And it started out with a parable of the employer hiring people for the vineyard. A very popular parable. And he promised him 1 silver coin for the work for the day. And so they agreed. They went to work. Then about 9 o'clock, he saw some more people and he sent them to work. And at 12 o'clock, he saw some more people. They sent them to work. And at 5 o'clock, he saw somebody else. And so he sent them to work down at the vineyard. And then at the end of the day, he asked his foreman to call all the people employees so they can get paid. And he gave them each. The last were first. And he gave them each 1 silver coin. So the ones who were working all day were very upset about that. And he says to them, I paid you what I promised to pay you. So why are you complaining? Can I do what I want with my money? If I want to be generous, can I do that? Now that was the first parable. And then there was a question Peter said. Peter asked Jesus, how many times do we have to forgive someone? 7 times? And Jesus said, no, 7 times 7. And then we had the parable of, let me see here. And then we had, after Peter had said that, and Jesus said 70 times 7, there was a parable about a king who forgave a person their debt of $1 million. And then that person went off and threw someone in jail for owing him $3. Wow. So all the other servants got very mad and went back to the king and told him, and that horrible servant was put back into jail until he could pay his debt. Now that's how that had started. And he said, because he didn't forgive. And Jesus said, that is how my Father in heaven will treat every one of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. Not just from your mouth, from your heart. Okay. And we began with the story of the peasant and the princess. And there was a big feast and a tournament for this land that was at the end of the world, at the end of the earth. And a peasant came in, and they were very unpleased. They were not pleased because everybody worked very hard to be in this tournament. And here comes this little peasant, and he's dressed in rags, and he is in this contest to move this big boulder, and everybody moves it to the other end of the field. And this little peasant takes out this little this little hammer, and he looks all over the thing, and he taps that boulder, and it fractures into many pieces, and he took it over to the end of the field piece by piece. Nobody thought he should win. Everybody said, no, that's not fair, because everybody worked so hard, and he didn't work hard, so he can't win. No, he can't win because he didn't even work hard. So the contestant said, no, he should not win when the king asked. The audience said, no, he cannot win because he didn't work hard. No, everybody said. And the king looked at him and said, well, what do you think? And then the little man with the raggedy clothes and the tattered shoes told the king a parable. And I want to repeat it, but it showed his wisdom. And the king said, sit beside me, stand beside me. And he won. Well, they all left the palace, left the banquet hall, and all went off with the king, all the winners. And all the spectators went home to the four corners of the earth. Okay? You got that now? Here they are, the little ragged man with the tattered shoes. He won. He was one of the contestants that won. And they all went back to the palace with the king. So we're going to start the story from there. To celebrate the completion of the games and to welcome the new victors to the kingdom, the king held a ball in the great hall of the palace. The men were dressed in fine robes and the women in rich and beautiful gowns. It was a picture of elegance and splendor. Only the peasant was dressed as before in ragged clothes and tattered shoes, a pitiful contrast to the beauty of the occasion. There was great merriment, feasting and dancing, but he sat quietly at table observing the others. When the king's daughter entered the hall, all attention and activities were instantly directed at her. She was beautiful beyond description. She seemed more radiant than the diamonds that lit the room. The king summons the newest member of his court, introduced them to the princess, and gave to each of them the great honor of dancing with his daughter. The orchestra began playing again, while one by one they danced with her. She waltzed with the grace of a swan around and around the great hall. At last, when all the others had had a turn, the peasant came forward. The courtiers and ladies were embarrassed by his presence, trying not to look at him as he approached the princess. She stood there, a vision of loveliness, all dressed in white, while he looked like some sort of foolish droll, bowing before her, taking her hand. The orchestra began to play, and as he turned to take her in his arms, he clumsily stepped on one of her shoes. It was to be expected. What else could one so obviously ill-bred be expected to do? The princess cried out in pain and anger. "You stepped on me!" She shrieked, drawing everyone's attention. "You clumsy fool! See what you've done? You've stepped on my shoe, and you've made it dirty like you. I will have to leave the party now, all because of you." The peasant was embarrassed by what had happened. He was ashamed and sorry for causing the princess such distress. "Forgive me, I am sorry," he stammered. "Forgive me. How can I forgive you? I will have to leave the ball. I can't dance with a dirty shoe." She turned around for the others to see her plight. They quickly came to her comfort. The peasant struggled to make amends. "Please forgive me," he repeated. "If only there was something I could do." The princess turned and shouted to him, "If you want me to forgive you, then quick, bring me a new pair of shoes." At once the peasant left the hall. Minutes later he returned, holding in his hands a beautiful pair of golden glass slippers. The princess, surrounded by her ladies in waiting, stopped her sobbing to see what manner of shoe a lowly peasant would bring to her. Okay, she was surprised and pleased when she saw them, but careful not to show it. "They will have to do," she said, and snatched them away from him. The peasant withdrew to his lonely seat at the table. We'll continue with this right after this commercial.
Nice ballpark here.
Real nice.
What do you think? They'll let us play a couple games here?
Who we gonna play?
What's up, you guys lost? Just wondering, Hartford's bravest, brave enough to play HPD in here for a couple games?
You know that's not the world's biggest Dunkin Donut.
You know there's no lost kittens in there either, right? We don't want to be here all day. You guys are short-staffed, you got to fill shifts.
Ain't no rules.
Calm down, guys. Calm down. Despacito. Let's play for Julito and let the best team win September 23rd.
Get your popcorn.
Uh-oh. Fixing myself up. Welcome back to Miss Cleo's Storytelling Corner. We're going to continue with the peasant and the princess. The peasant has just given the princess glass slippers, golden glass slippers. And then he went back and sat at the table by himself. The ball continued, but the peasant did not dare again to approach the princess. Indeed, he sat by himself for the entire evening. When the tower clock struck the hour of midnight, the party ended. All the revelers went off to their rooms for the night. When the princess arrived in her bedchamber, she felt a strange uneasiness about the evening's activities. True, she had danced with all the victors as she had in previous years, and they were as pleasant and pleasing to her now as the ones in the past. But still, she had not found one whom she might desire to marry. There were many handsome men at the ball, but certainly none that could match her beauty, nor could those who were wise or talented, she thought, matched her wisdom and grace. It was to be another fruitless year of waiting until the next new group of winners would arrive. She heaved and sighed her sigh of annoyance as she bent over to remove her shoes. At first she thought her feet had swollen from the long night of dancing because the glass slippers would not come off. She tugged and pulled at one and then the other, but they stuck to her feet. What little patience she had vanished as she tumbled to the floor, wrestling with the shoes. Exasperated, she called to her servants to help, but none of them could remove the slippers. They held hard and fast. "What nonsense is this?" she screamed out. "That awful peasant has done this to me. Bring him immediately." At once, the peasant was summoned and brought to her chamber. "These slippers will not come off," she chided. "What have you done to me?" "Forgive me, my princess," he whispered. Forgive me. Is that all you can say? Well, I won't forgive you unless you remove these awful slippers from my feet." "I shall immediately," he said. He knelt down and without the slightest effort took the golden slippers off. The ease with which he did it surprised the princess. "Who are you, and how is it you came to be here?" "Like the others, I competed and won." "You are not like the others," the princess shot back quickly. "You are not at all like any of the others. Why would you possibly want to come here? Why?" "I have come here to marry you," was his simple reply. His answer at first left the princess speechless. If it weren't so foolish, she would have been angry. Instead, she laughed. The idea was so ridiculous that she laughed even harder. "Marry me? Why, you are not only ugly, you are a fool. Be off and consider yourself fortunate that I don't have you thrown into the dungeon for all the distress you have caused me. Now go. I don't want to see you again, ever." Without a word, the peasant left her chamber. What happened afterwards did not happen quickly, but became only gradually noticeable over the following weeks and months. The princess began to grow ugly. First, the beautiful white glow of her skin began to fade. It became dull and yellowish, like tarnish. Then her hair lost its luster. Wrinkles began to appear on her face and hands, which grew deeper like scars over the passing days. The people of the court saw the change happening to the princess, but were careful not to mention them. They did not want to offend her, and they also remembered her quick temper. Instead, they tried to talk of things that would make her laugh. The only thing she found amusing was to recall the story of the ugly peasant who had wanted to marry her. This would cause her to break into fits of laughter. Imagine me marrying that creature. How ridiculous. Why, he even smelled, she said. As she put her fingers to her nose, the others imitated her and claimed that they could almost smell him from there. Indeed, they noticed a real trace of a peculiar peasant odor in the room. Even as they laughed, it grew stronger. He must be hiding in the room, they thought, so they made a game of looking for him. They searched behind the drapes and in the closets and even in drawers, to the great amusement of the princess. In the days and weeks that followed, the princess noticed the smell everywhere. It grew stronger and stronger and seemed to be following her wherever she went. The others were aware of it too, but were careful not to mention it anymore. Instead, they tried to amuse the princess by telling her funny stories about happenings around the castle. When these failed to amuse her, they asked her to tell them about the ugly, smelly peasant again. This she would do with great delight, each time adding some new observation that would set everyone laughing. One time, she said, not only was he ugly and smelly, but his ragged clothes were horrid. They hung on him like floppy pantaloons on a scarecrow. The new description delighted her listeners at the time, who began to strike different poses imitating scarecrows. Indeed, they would have all lingered about in their merriment for the rest of the day, but for the awful smell in the room. In appropriate haste, they made their exit, leaving the princess to laugh alone. Oh, what was happening to that princess? She was getting old and wrinkled. Oh, I wonder how it's going to continue. But we will hear what happens to the princess in just a moment, right after our next commercial.
Nice ballpark here.
Real nice.
What do you think? They'll let us play a couple games here?
Who we gonna play?
What's up, you guys lost? Just wondering, Hartford's bravest, braving us to play HPD in here for a couple games?
You know that's not the world's biggest Dunkin Donut.
You know there's no lost kittens in there either, right? We don't want to be here all day. You guys are short-staffed, you got to fill shifts.
Ain't no rules.
Calm down, guys, calm down. Despacito. Let's play for Julito and let the best team win September 23rd.
Get your popcorn.
I started skipping school at the age of 7. My mom didn't realize until she actually went to go pick up my notes. And she realized I was getting left back. After that, I started hanging out with the wrong crew. I ended up in jail 3 times. Parents, what I'm trying to say is keep on top of your kids. Make sure you call, make sure you do what you gotta do. You know, parents, School is important. It's a big deal.
Oh my goodness, woo! This princess really smells. Nobody wants to be near her. She looking old and wrinkled. She doesn't seem to be noticing this. But let's go on. Everybody left the room. She was smelling. She stayed in the room laughing about the story about the peasant. As the end of the year approached, there was again much excitement about the coming contest. The castle was decorated for the victory ball. The food for the banquet was prepared. The courtiers and ladies set out their finest clothes. The princess spent the last month in seclusion so that her grand entrance would have added importance. At last the great day arrived, and with much fanfare, the victors were escorted to the castle by the king. That evening, the great hall was once again filled with music and merriment. Shortly after the dancing had begun, when the proper amount of time had lapsed, the trumpet sounded to announce the arrival of the princess. All eyes turned to the staircase. Then the princess made her appearance. There was an audible gasp from the assembled crowd. There, at the head of the stairs, was not the beautiful princess of years past. Instead, there stood an ugly, pale wisp of a woman who looked more old than young. Even the beautiful gown she wore hung heavily on her frail body, giving her the appearance of a dressed-up scarecrow. As she slowly descended the stairs, a distinctly unpleasant odor accompanied her. No one moved. Indeed, no one even uttered a word, so great was their surprise. The entire assembly stood frozen like statues. Even when the princess reached the bottom stair and stumbled on her own gown, not one person hastened to her. She lay there on the floor, sobbing. At long last, someone came forward through the gaping crowd to where the princess fell. He bent over to take her hand. When the princess reached up to take it, she looked into the face of the most handsome man she had ever seen. She was overwhelmed by his beauty and his graciousness. She rose to her feet, embarrassed at her clumsiness. "May I have this dance?" he asked. She could not answer. He took her in his arms, and the orchestra began to play. The others continued to stand dumbstruck while the couple started to dance. No sooner had she begun to dance with him when she turned and stepped on his foot. She had never done that before, not in her whole life. Her face flushed with embarrassment. "Forgive me," she apologized for the first time in her life. "Gladly," he said instantly. "Think nothing of it." It was too much for her pitiful condition and his kindness. She ran off sobbing into the garden. The handsome young man ran out after her. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I am so wretched," she cried. Why don't you leave me and join the others?" "But I came for you," he replied. "For me?" She was startled out of her tears. "For me?" she repeated. "But why?" "I came here to marry you." Alas, she thought, after waiting all these years for the right person. Then she cried out, "How could you possibly want to marry me?" "But Princess, why should I not want to marry you?" "Because I am no longer beautiful, but ugly." That makes no difference to me, because I smell," she added. "Nor does that matter, because I look like a scarecrow," she pleaded. "No matter." "But how can you want me? I am a terrible princess, not even worthy enough to marry a peasant." "My princess," he said softly, "I am that peasant." Before she could utter another word, he took her in his arms and kissed her. At once she became the beautiful young princess again. Hand in hand, they walked back into the great hall and danced into forever. Wow. Wow. Now, you've heard the story of the peasant and the princess. You've heard the parables of the vineyard. You heard Peter asked Jesus, "How many times do you forgive?" Jesus said 70 times 7. And you heard the parable of the unforgiving servant. Now, the peasant and the princess. How does that all connect, Miss Cleo? How does that all connect? Well, that's something you need to think about. How does it all connect? The peasant, the princess, winning. The peasant won. The peasant won. What does it all mean? Well, I want you to think about it. Think about what that all means. Put it together. Put it all together. Forgiveness. Very powerful. If you don't forgive, you won't be forgiven. Think about how the princess treated the peasant. Think of how the crowd didn't think he was worthy. Think of the king telling him to come on, stand by my side with the other victors. Just think about the story and what it means, and I hope you learned something from it. I hope you got something out of it, because I told it for you to get something out of. So, it's time for me to go again. I'll be back next week with some more stories, or maybe a guest, or whatever Miss Cleo can conjure up in her storytelling mind. But until that time, read a little, write a little, dream big, and I will see you next week.